In a sealed ECOWAS meeting in Accra, President Ibrahim Traoré was handed a classified letter signed by 5 African generals. It ordered him to stand down, rejoin French security cooperation, and cease destabilizing the region. Everyone expected him to fold. Instead, he asked one question that left the room frozen: who do you really serve? What happened next shattered the entire chain of command and left one general in handcuffs. Can a young leader survive when truth becomes more dangerous than war? Stay tuned on Courageous Voices, because this story will redefine Africa's future. The air in the Opera conference room was thick with quiet hostility. Suits and stars lined the mahogany table. Generals from Nigeria, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal sat shoulder to shoulder, flanked by diplomats and aides scribbling notes. President Ibrahim Traoré entered without an entourage, no translator, no advisor, just the desert-colored uniform he always wore, sleeves rolled up, collar unbuttoned. General Christopher Musa, Nigeria's chief of defense staff, cleared his throat and stood. "Mr. President," he began, deliberately avoiding the word comrade. "We have agreed upon a declaration for regional stabilization and mutual security enforcement." A junior officer passed the paper across the table. Traoré didn't reach for it. "You're requested to cease all independent anti-terror operations," Musa continued, "and to re-establish cooperation with allied intelligence units, namely French and ECOWAS support teams." The room went silent. Someone clicked a pen. Someone else coughed. Traoré looked up slowly, eyes unreadable. "Requested?" he asked. His voice didn't rise, it never needed to. Musa stiffened. Failure to comply could trigger coordinated sanctions. You risk alienating your neighbors, your people. Traoré leaned back. "My people are not your bargaining chip." Across the room, General Chase Sarr of Senegal muttered something under his breath in French. Traoré heard it. He stood. "I won't be dictated to by men who never set foot in Djibo, who never stood beside our soldiers when the bullets didn't stop at 5 o'clock. He turned and walked out without the letter. Outside, a young journalist whispered to her cameraman, "Did he just walk away from all of ECOWAS?" No one could answer her. But inside that room, the chain of command didn't just tremble, it cracked. And none of the generals saw what was already set in motion. Think this was just a bold exit? Hold on, because what Traoré did next on Courageous Voices will leave you speechless. 2 nights before the Accra summit, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone on the rooftop of Kosiam Palace, watching the city lights flicker through the Saharan dust. A rusted military jeep had rolled up quietly, headlights off. The man who stepped out wasn't listed on any delegation manifest, Lieutenant Yao from Côte d'Ivoire, once embedded with the ECOWAS Joint Command, now defected and trembling. Yao didn't speak at first. He simply handed over a sealed envelope, his hands slick with sweat. "They think you're a child with a flag," he whispered. "But you need to see what they've planned." Inside the envelope was a copy of the same letter General Musa would try to hand him days later, word for word. But attached was something more damning, a dossier detailing a covert operation titled Sand Return. Its objective was clear: to reinstall French-backed special units in the northern corridor of Burkina Faso under the guise of regional assistance. Traoré didn't react. He simply folded the letter, slipped it into his pocket, and dismissed the lieutenant with only one sentence: "Don't go home." By the time he landed in Accra, every handshake felt colder, every smile a performance. He watched the generals talk about protocol, regional unity, shared intelligence, as if the betrayal hadn't already begun. When General Musa presented the letter in that meeting, Traoré already knew every line, knew which general signed it first, knew who suggested the language, knew who wanted him erased, not by assassination, but by slow obedience. He let them speak. He let them posture, because silence in that moment was his sharpest blade. And in his pocket, that folded letter burned like a quiet match, waiting for the wind. 3 weeks before the ECOWAS summit, a private jet landed under the cover of night at Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja. No press, no protocol. Inside a heavily guarded villa tucked behind the Ministry of Defense, 4 African generals gathered at a long table: General Christopher Musa of Nigeria, General Sarr of Senegal, General Mensa Obuag of Ghana, and General Konyef of Côte d'Ivoire. The French liaison was already seated, sipping coffee, a folder of maps in his briefcase. They spoke of rising jihadist threats, the chaos in the Sahel, and the recklessness of Traoré's government. But beneath the concern was something sharper: a fear. Fear that a young Burkinabe officer with no colonial allegiance might spark a movement too contagious to contain. The Frenchman opened the folder and spread satellite images of Djibo, Goram, and the Bouclé du Mohon. We propose reactivating our intel stations, light footprint, all through ECOWAS authority. General Musa hesitated. And what if Traoré refuses? General Sarr didn't blink. Then we isolate him. We cut supply lines, trigger a border panic, make his people question his leadership. All nodded. By the end of the meeting, the pact was sealed, not with signatures, but shared silence and handshakes. Operation Sand Return was born, an effort framed as stabilization, but engineered to reinstate French influence under African faces. They underestimated one detail. A clerk in the logistics unit, loyal to Burkina Faso, snapped photos of the maps and documents. 2 days later, they reached a defector named Lieutenant Yao. And when Traoré unfolded the letter on his rooftop in Ouagadougou, he didn't just see betrayal, he saw war dressed in suits, hidden behind protocols. And he understood then, the enemy was no longer just in the forest, it was at the table. The tension in the Kosiam Palace war room was suffocating. Maps lay spread across the long table, red markers circling suspected insurgent corridors, but no one was looking at them. All eyes were on President Ibrahim Traoré, his arms folded, his face unreadable as his cabinet tore itself apart. "We are not ready for this kind of isolation," the finance minister said, his voice cracking. "Nigeria is threatening to freeze regional transfers. Ghana is holding our shipment of medical supplies." Across from him, the Minister of Foreign Affairs added, "There is still time to negotiate. We could resume coordination with ECOWAS intel forces, at least symbolically." The room fell silent as Minister of Interior Hamidou Yedrogo stood. Cameras had been allowed to film this meeting for transparency, a choice Traoré had insisted on. Yedrogo faced the cameras, removed his lapel pin, and said, "This man is leading us into chaos. He is too young, too radical. Burkina Faso will be left in ruins." He placed the pin on the table, turned, and walked out. The room stayed quiet. One by one, eyes turned to Traoré. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He simply gathered the maps one by one, rolled them up, and walked toward the window. "They want us to believe we were never meant to lead ourselves," he said quietly, "that we're only safe when watched." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fire a single minister. He simply whispered something to his aide before leaving the room. "Call the commander at Fada." What his cabinet didn't know, what even his closest allies couldn't yet guess, was that the real battle had already begun, not in the fields, but in the shadows of loyalty. And Traoré wasn't planning to argue anymore, he was planning to move. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the ECOWAS-controlled communication tower outside Fada Ngorma went dark. No signal, no response. For 37 minutes, the command base vanished from the grid. By sunrise, whispers were spreading in Ouagadougou's intelligence corridors. Captain Roamba, head of Traoré's field intelligence unit, burst into the situation room, holding a decoded intercept. "It wasn't a technical failure," she said, dropping the transcript on the table. "They were told to disband. They didn't." The order had come from ECOWAS High Command, cloaked as a routine reallocation of forces. But the unit stationed there, composed mostly of Burkinabe loyalists, refused, and now they had gone silent. By noon, satellite imagery confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. The base hadn't just gone offline, it had changed hands. The Burkinabe soldiers had seized it and radioed to 3 other outposts with a single phrase, "Faso will not kneel." Even more surprising, 2 garrisons in eastern Ghana and northern Benin responded with coded affirmations. Traoré's stance was catching fire beyond the borders. Inside the Kosiam Palace, Traoré studied the map quietly. "How many are with them?" he asked. 2 full platoons, maybe more, and civilian militias are offering supplies." He didn't smile, but he didn't flinch either. He simply circled the silent base with a red marker. "This is not rebellion," he said. "It's a return." Then he turned to Captain Roamba and said something that changed the course of the week. "Do not recall them. Do not correct them. Just listen." The chain of command wasn't just cracking now, it was splintering. And for the first time, it wasn't Traoré pulling the strings, it was the people who had nothing left to lose. The rain hit the windows of Kosiam Palace in sharp, erratic bursts. It was just past midnight when President Traoré summoned only 6 people to the war room. No secretaries, no press, no aides, just those who had security clearance and something to lose. On the table lay a manila folder thick with satellite printouts and digital intercepts. At the top was one name, Colonel Ibrahim Doumbia, Traoré's former instructor, one of the most decorated men in the Burkinabe armed forces, and until last week, the liaison for regional military coordination. Captain Roamba's voice was cold as she briefed the room. "We traced the leak to a shared encrypted server routed through the French embassy. The IP was masked, but we triangulated its access points." She turned the screen. The footage showed Doumbia entering the embassy in civilian clothes twice without clearance. Then came the final blow, a recovered message fragment, a satellite image of troop movement near Djibo, marked in French and timestamped 36 hours before the ECOWAS letter was ever drafted. Traoré didn't say a word. He looked at the image, then at the encrypted phone recovered from Doumbia's private quarters. Its SIM card missing, its history wiped clean except for one message draft never sent, he suspects nothing yet. General Zongo, head of the Presidential Guard, slammed his fist on the table. "We trained with him, ate with him." Traoré's reply was quiet, "and still he fed us to those who want our bones as bargaining chips." Without raising his voice,
Traoré signed an order. Doumbia was to be arrested before dawn.
No press, no trial, not yet. And in that moment, the war outside paused because the real war had stepped inside, and now trust was a battlefield, too. The sun had barely touched the rooftops of Ouagadougou when every radio frequency, television channel, and live stream app lit up with the same feed. President Ibrahim Traoré stood alone on a plain platform outside Kossiam Palace. No flags, no guards, just the cracked concrete beneath his boots and a microphone that carried across a continent. His voice was calm, stripped of any ceremonial tone. I speak today not as a soldier, but as a son of this land. They say we are rebels, that we have strayed from order. But let me be clear, we are not rebels. We are reclaiming our soil. His eyes didn't blink. His hands never moved. For too long, decisions about our future have been made in rooms we're not allowed to enter, signed in languages we don't speak, and enforced by uniforms we didn't approve. He leaned forward slightly. We will not bow to chains wrapped in treaties. We will not trade our dignity for borrowed peace. This is our last stand, and we stand together. Then the screen went black. Within minutes, TikTok and Instagram accounts across Dakar, Bamako, and Abidjan were flooded with clips of the broadcast. In Lagos, students rewrote his speech into a chant. In Kinshasa, youth spray-painted "No more chains" on embassy walls. Something had ignited, but in dusty military compounds from Accra to Abuja, the broadcast hit differently. General Musa watched it in silence, his jaw clenched. He turned to his aide. He's forcing our hand. Draft the options. In the French embassy in Niamey, a coded message was sent: Phase 2 begins now. Traoré had lit a match, but the room he stood in was soaked with fuel, and every general was now deciding who burns first. Could this be the spark that changes everything? Stay with Courageous Voices to find out. Just after 1 a.m., black jeeps with no plates rolled down the cracked streets of Ouagadougou. Their lights were off, engines barely hummed. Inside Traoré's elite unit, Groupement de Sécurité Présidentielle, moved with surgical precision, the target a private compound on the edge of Zone du Bois, a place not listed on any government ledger, but well known to intelligence operatives. Inside the compound, for generals, 2 Burkinabe, 1 Ghanaian, and 1 from Côte d'Ivoire, sat hunched over maps, encrypted tablets glowing. They weren't supposed to be meeting. They weren't supposed to be in Burkina Faso. The door exploded open, no warning, no compromise. Camera drones had been deployed moments before, hidden on balconies and in light fixtures. Everything was being recorded, every shout, every look of panic, every command denied. General Yakuba Dio reached for his sidearm. He never made it. A steel boot slammed his wrist to the table. "You've just broken every protocol," roared General Mensa Abouag, his face red, sweat beading. President Traoré stepped into the room, calm, slow. "So did they," he said, nodding toward the cameras. "The only difference is I'm not hiding anymore." "You're destroying regional unity," someone shouted. Traoré shook his head. "I'm destroying the illusion that unity was ever ours to control." He paused. "Let the people decide the next protocol." The feed was transmitted quietly at first, then virally across West African military forums, news outlets, even WhatsApp chains. By sunrise, everyone had seen it: 4 generals detained without bloodshed. The youngest head of state in Africa standing in a room of old war dogs and not blinking. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just a raid, it was a rewrite.
And now every man in uniform had to ask, whose orders do I follow now?
By midday, the footage had leaked, first through an anonymous Telegram channel, then on Al Jazeera, then across every major African news outlet. Grainy at first, then crystal clear. 4 generals, hands raised, faces pale, surrounded by Traoré's elite forces.
The cameras didn't shake. The audio didn't stutter.
Every word, every accusation, every calm reply from Traoré played like a documentary, unedited and raw.
The continent erupted in Dakar. Senegal's youth flooded the streets, waving Burkinabe flags. President Macky Sall's office released a cautious statement: "We stand with those who stand for sovereignty." Guinea-Bissau's Transitional Council went further, calling Traoré's actions necessary corrections. But in Abuja and Accra, the mood turned venomous. Nigeria's foreign ministry called it an attack on regional military unity and immediately withdrew its ambassador from Ouagadougou. Ghana followed within hours.
ECOWAS emergency lines buzzed nonstop, its leadership paralyzed by the split.
Inside a dark room in the French embassy in Ouagadougou, a diplomat smashed his phone against the wall.
France issued no public statement, but internal chatter revealed unease. The chain of influence they had so carefully built was unraveling.
And then came the unexpected call. U.S. diplomats requested an immediate closed-door session with Traoré's inner circle.
The language was careful, not confrontational, curious.
Washington sees movement. One American envoy said, "We don't like chaos, but we understand history when we see it unfold." In Kosiam Palace, Traoré read each headline in silence.
His aide leaned in, voice barely above a whisper.
"You've broken the chain." Traoré shook his head.
"No, the chain broke itself.
I just stopped pretending it was still holding." But outside the gates, one question rang louder than before: if the old order has fallen, what rises next? The ink was still wet when Traoré signed the final directive.
Effective immediately, all foreign military advisory roles in Burkina Faso were to be dissolved, no exceptions, no extensions.
The new doctrine was lean, sharp, written in the language of sovereignty.
It outlined a self-reliant force built from the ground up, community brigades, rural defense networks, and a reshaped command structure where loyalty to the people outranked foreign credentials. The announcement was made without fanfare, no drums, no parades, just a PDF posted to the government's secure site, followed by a single-line statement from the presidency: "We will walk forward alone if we must." Later that evening, Traoré stepped out onto the empty military parade ground behind Kosiam Palace. Dust curled around his boots as he moved across cracked concrete.
The ghosts of formations once drilled under foreign orders lingered in the silence.
He stopped near the faded reviewing stand, looked out across the barren space, and spoke softly to no one in particular. "Freedom has no script," he said, "only sacrifice." The wind carried his words past the walls, out into the city where children played barefoot and mothers listened to transistor radios that buzzed with static and revolution.
In universities from Nairobi to Bamako, students debated him. In barracks from Koukour to Juba, soldiers whispered his name, not with certainty, but with curiosity: a leader without permission, a general without age, a voice louder than his rank.
But beneath all the speculation, beneath the policy shifts and diplomatic maneuvers, one question pulsed through the continent like a drumbeat under the skin: what happens when a young man with a question becomes more powerful than an old man with a gun? No one had the answer yet, but everyone knew they'd have to choose sides soon.
If this story moved you,
Don't just scroll, hit that like button to show support for real leadership, and subscribe to Courageous Voices for more powerful untold stories from Africa and beyond.
Drop a comment below. Do you stand with Traoré or the old command? Turn on notifications so you never miss what they don't want you to see. The next chapter is coming. Will you be ready?